Should Christians engage in politics? Hi, and welcome to Faith in Front. Should Christians engage in politics? Well, let's look at what it says in Romans chapter 13, verse 1. And it says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." And when you jump down to verse 4, it says, "For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer." So when it talks about the one in authority is God's servant. So the government should be God's servants, and they should be there to promote good and restrain evil. That's really the purpose, overall arching purpose of government. It's gotten in the weeds a lot over the years, and sometimes, yes, the government is in things that God never intended for them to be in, but the overall purpose of government is to promote good and restrain evil. Now, the problem comes in is that we live in a culture now where we have really different definitions of what's good and what's evil. I've seen in government things that I believe are evil that should be restrained by the government, but they're actually being promoted by government. I mean, for children to see things that they shouldn't see at a young age through the books and things like that, to me, that's evil, because that's like grooming a child. When a pedophile wants to do the wrong thing with a child, they will show them explicit material to groom them. And then when you see it just being okay and government saying, not everyone in government, but certain parts of the government, because thankfully there are those in government that totally think that's evil and it shouldn't be allowed, but you have a lot who think that's perfectly okay. And so we have a difference in what's good and what's evil when we talk about the role of government promoting good and restraining evil. We can get into some heavy debates about what's good and what's evil, because there are a lot of people in government that don't have a biblical worldview. And so they obviously are going to promote things that are good, that when you look at scripture, you're saying that's not good at all. So that raises the question, how much should Christians engage? Well, I am of the belief that we should engage, because the Bible clearly tells us to let our light shine before men. And I don't think that meant in certain areas, but then because he says, why would you hide your light under a bushel? When we don't engage, it's like hiding our light under a bushel. We're supposed to be a light. Scripture says that we are a light of the world. But sometimes even in the church, this is a big debate. This is not just a debate between those who go to church or those who are Christians or those who are not Christians. It's a debate in the church, because you have one part of the church saying, you just give them the gospel. You just give them the gospel and let them be transformed and changed, and then they'll see that what they're doing is wrong. That sounds spiritual. And I do agree that, yes, the number one priority is that, yes, we are to be sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ, because as it says in Romans 1:16, it is the power, the gospel, the good news. It is the power unto salvation. But just think about this. What if during slavery in this country, the Christians during that time had the same mindset? Because, slavery was a highly political topic. Oh, it was political. What if the Christians during that time said, well, that's a political issue, so we're just going to try to give them the gospel, and maybe hopefully that'll work. I'm glad that they did not take that view. They understood that no, we are all God image bearers. So that's where we get our intrinsic worth and value from, is from God. So I'm thankful that the Christians during that period started the Underground Railroad. They helped with it. They understood that it needed to be abolished, that they needed to insert themselves, even though it was a very highly politicized topic, brought us to a civil war. I mean, it was political. But aren't you glad that they didn't say, we're not going to engage with that. We're just going to, give them the gospel, and hopefully they'll change, and then they'll see how slavery's wrong. We'd probably still be in slavery if that was the case. So I'm thankful that they still engaged to help bring an end to it. Now, it is true that there were those who did come into the knowledge of Christ, and they understood that through coming through the knowledge of Christ, they understood that that this is wrong. And so they started to fight against slavery. So don't allow someone to silence you by saying, well, that's political. You stay out of that. God made government. So anything that God made, he has a view about it. And we as Christians can express that view about it. So I don't think there's anything where we say, oh, no, we don't talk about that because that's political. And what I find so funny is that people will use things like the separation of church and state. Now, that was really just a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a Baptist church to assure them that the government couldn't come in and infringe upon their religious freedoms, that the government couldn't come in and dictate to them how they lived out their convictions. That's all that was just a letter. But it's been hijacked to say, well, no, separation of church and state. And what I find interesting is that this last political season, I saw a lot of politicians walking right up into pulpits. What happened to the separation of church and state? Why are you in the church? See, they want us to be quiet. But then you got these certain pastors out here, okay, that's more so into liberation theology than anything. So they'll have them come up in there and quote a few scriptures and, get the people all roused up. What happened to church? Separation church state. My thing is don't come into this church if we're supposed to be separated. You're a politician. What are you doing? No one ever stops to think about that. They'll tell you separation of church and state, so be quiet, but then step right up into your pulpit as a politician. Don't get that. So I hope this has encouraged you to just keep in mind that, yes, God has something to say about everything. And don't allow someone to cause you to put your light under a bushel by saying things like, well, that's political. You shouldn't talk about that. You do it with gentleness and respect, but please don't be silent. We have to be a light to the world. And yes, engaging in politics is another way. I'm not saying you have to be a politician. I'm not saying you got to get out and start, marching. I'm just saying, just with your vote and just looking at policies and saying, okay, what spreads light and what spreads darkness? That's what I have to vote for. So I pray that gives you some clarity. And as usual, keep your faith in front.